Hare Krishna. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayet nashtaprayeshu bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. Hare Krishna, we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. And today's verses are 38 and 39. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vayoscha sparsha tanmatrad Rupam daiveritad abhut Samuthitam tatastejas chakshurupopalambhanam. Vayosya sparsha tanmatrad rupam daiveritad abhut. Samuthitam tatastejas chakshurupopalambhanam. Sparsha tanmatrad rupam daiveritad abhut. Samuthitam tatastejas chakshurupopalambhanam. Synonyms: Vayoho from air, cha and sparsha tanmatrad, which evolves from subtle element of touch, rupam form, daiva iritat according to destiny, abhut evolved, samuthitam arose, tata from that, teja fire, chakshu sense of sight, rupa color and form, upalambhanam perceiving. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. By interactions of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms and color. Because of destiny, the touch sensation, the interactions of air, and the situations of the mind, which is produced of the ethereal element, one receives a body according to his previous activities. Needless to say, a living entity transmigrates from one form to another. His form changes according to destiny and by the arrangement of a superior authority which controls the interactions of air and mental situation. Form is the combination of different types of sense perception. Predestined activities are plans of the mental situation and the interaction of air. Text 39. द्रव्याकृतित्वं गुणता व्यक्तिसंस्थात्वमेव च तेजस्त्वं तेजसः साध्वी रूपमात्रस्य वृत्तयः द्रव्याकृतित्वं गुणता व्यक्तिसंस्थात्वमेव च तेजस्त्वं तेजसः साध्वी रूपमात्रस्य वृत्तयः द्रव्याकृतित्वं गुणता व्यक्तिसंस्थात्वमेव च तेजस्त्वं तेजसः साध्वी रूपमात्रस्य वृत्तयः. Dravya of an object, akrititvam dimension, gunata quality, vyakti samsthatvam individuality, eva also, cha and tejastvam effulgence, tejasah of fire, sadhvi O virtuous lady, rupa matrasya of the subtle element form, vrittayah the characteristics. Translation: My dear mother, the characteristics of form are understood by dimension, quality, and individuality. The form of fire is appreciated by its effulgence. Purport: every form that we appreciate has its particular dimensions and characteristics. The quality of a particular object is appreciated by its utility. But the form of sound is independent. Forms which are invisible can be only understood by touch. That is the independent appreciation of invisible form. Visible forms are understood by analytical study of their constitution. The constitution of a certain object is appreciated by its internal action. For example, the form of salt is appreciated by the interaction of salty taste, and the form of sugar is appreciated by the interaction of sweet taste. Taste and qualitative constitution are the basic principles in understanding the form of an object. Let me read the translations again. 38 and 39. By the interactions of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolutions of such form, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. My dear mother, the characteristics of form are understood by dimension, quality, and individuality. The form of fire is appreciated by its effulgence. ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Namam Vishnupadaaya Krishnapristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare. Again, welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam. This morning we are reading Canto 3, Chapter 26, text 38 and 39. So this is a series of verses where Kapila Dev is telling his mother Devahuti about how the material creation is happening. That is Sarga. So there are two, Sarga and Visarga, and in that, Sarga is what Lord Vishnu does, Visarga is what Lord Brahma does. So, we hear often how Brahma is this engineer, right? Like, so it's almost like in an automobile factory, there are these parts that where, and when you put them together, you get the automobile. So the parts are being formed, and what Lord Brahma does later will be putting them all together to create this wonderful universe. And so I wish to show you a table that my teacher, His Grace Bhaya Hari Prabhu, provided us during this chapter. I'm just pulling that table now. So it tells us how the sequence of creation, like what comes after the other, right? And the subtlest tanmatra in these series of verses is sound. Sound is what we hear is independent, and Prabhupada spoke about that in this purport that we just read. So sound is independent. So here, one moment. So again, this table is provided by His Grace Bhayari Prabhu. So early on in the chapter, we saw how there is Pradhan, which is this unmanifested conglomeration of material elements. Then what are the characteristics of Pradhan and what constitutes it? So those are the 5 gross elements, 5 tanmatras, 10 senses, and the antakarana. So right now we are in this section of understanding about how these gross elements and the tanmatras come about. So tanmatra meaning the sense object. Now on to this table. This is the section of verses from 33 to 49. So we see how the tanmatras come, and then from that, the gross elements, how are they coming, one after the other. So the sound is the tanmatra. The ether has the quality of the sound. Then the ether becomes the cause of touch, and from touch, you get the air. So right now, we are in text 38 and 39. Yesterday, Saragrahi Mataji talked about air, right? So air, um, also the prana. And so when I was reading text 38 and 39, it seemed like every line in the purport were, for me, disjointed. So to understand this further, my sources were Srila Prabhupada's classes, His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj's class, His Holiness Rompad Maharaj's class, and my own teacher Bhayari Prabhu's classes. So that's how I tried to make sense of these purports here. So let's go to 38. So 38 is talking about how by the interaction of air and touch one receives different forms according to destiny. So we hear, right, like in Bhagavad Gita, we hear gunai karmani sarvashaha, prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. So we hear that we get a body according to our guna and karma, according to what we desire and what we deserve. And to put it simply, right, where does air come from? This is where I wanted to talk about how air. So yesterday we heard about how air moves things. So let's say there is, you know, uh, an object you need to get to. Maybe, you need to go turn off the stove. You have to get up and go. For that movement to happen, air is required. And we were hearing yesterday, Mataji was saying paralysis in the body and certain other ailments are because of this prana not moving properly. So first of all, we should understand that the activities that we do, which brings about its causal effect, its effect, right? Like the good or the bad, like we say, those activities are possible because of the movement of air. So that is number one. The second thing to understand is that the whole system, how the soul is supported in the body is through air. So in Mundaka Upanishad, again, this is quoted in Srila Prabhupada's purport to text 17 in chapter 2. So 2.17 purport, Mundaka Upanishad is quoted. So the translation of that is, the soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in 5 kinds of air: prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana. And it is situated within the heart, and it spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contaminations of the 5 kinds of material air, its spiritual influence is exhibited. So we see this, how the soul and the prana, the different airs, are enmeshed. So then I wanted to point out, um, again, to bolster this point, that air is important for any kind of sense perception to happen. So in Chandogya Upanishad, it is said, Navai vacho na chakshumshi, na shrotrani, na manamsiti, achakshate prana iti, eva achakshate pranohya, eva itani sarvani bhavanti. In the body of living being, neither the power to speak, nor the power to see, nor the power to hear, nor the power to think is the prime factor. It is life which is itself the center of all activities. So again, they're saying how prana, it is the center of all activities. So again, just one more reference to this whole subject matter. This is in the purport to Bhagavad Gita 4.27. The soul is subjected to functions of 10 kinds of air at work within the body, and this is perceived through the breathing system. The Patanjali system of yoga instructs how to control the functions of body's air in a technical manner. Um, so I think I'm going to pause the reading of the purport. So basically, we can see how the soul is so enmeshed with air the pranas, the 10 types of pranas, while in the body. Similarly, when the soul leaves this body and goes to the next body, how does it happen? It happens through the air because air is essential for movement. So, um, just as an aside, yesterday I was reading about snails with my son, younger one. We were reading about different animals. So this particular creature is very interesting. So when the egg, it's the snail is born from the egg. The first thing it starts doing is creating its outer body. Kind of how the soul's outer body is created by our guna and karma. The outer body of a snail is formed. But that outer body, the shell, is tightly connected because of a one muscle. Tightly attach the snail out of it. So what attaches the subtle body to the gross body? It is the prana. The prana tightly attaches to the gross body. Similarly, at the time of death, the prana withdraws from the gross body, and then the prana helps move the subtle body, and the soul is obviously along with it, to the next body that is waiting for it. And then the prana attaches to the second body, the next body, rather. So, this is why in this particular verse, it is said that by the interactions of air in the same time, one receives different forms according to destiny. Um, so then, now that we have come from air to the form, which is the next tanmatra, the next verse in 39 talks about the qualities of this form. What are these characteristics of this form? There are three being listed in the translation: dimension, quality, and individuality. So, we can understand there is obviously, when you look at a form, there is dimension, there is, like for example, a table, right? Like you can say, oh, this table is teak wood, this is rosewood. So there are qualities. We understand them in a gross form. And, but there are some intriguing lines in this purport. So Prabhupada writes, forms which are invisible can be understood only by touch. So, the way to understand this is, let's say there is a visually impaired person. How do they sense the form? They touch it, right? They may touch an object and they may get the form of an object. Um, or there are little creatures, like, again, going back to my, homeschool class with Govinda, there are lower forms of animals, right, which don't have this sense of sight. But how do they understand this form? It is by sense of touch. They have these feelers. They keep touching and they understand there is a form. So even though it is invisible to us, the form can be understood through this sense of touch. Or this other thing, air, right? Like when air cannot be seen, but when the air flows, you see the tree move, it sways. So you can understand that the air is moving. So that form is appreciated in a different way. Or when the air moves and the leaves move and they make, sometimes the circular pattern, you see a form over there. You see that in motion, what is invisible now becomes is sensible for us. Um, Prabhupada gives an example here. He says, for example, the form of salt is appreciated by the interactions of salty taste. The form of sugar is appreciated by interaction of sweet taste. So again, one way I was thinking about is, so this is how I'm understanding this purport again. Like, if you go to chemistry, for example, right, like there is a form, water, it's yes, it's got a flowing element to it, but water is H2O. So when you write as a chemist, you will see, oh, there is an O that has two bonds and there is hydrogen and it is at this angle. So there is even a form at that level, if you keep going down. But how do you understand the form of water? It is through the sense of taste. Another way to understand is, for example, uh, when we were studying chemistry, for example, we would say, if you're given like taste test, right? Like if you're given two things, one tastes sour, then you immediately know it's got an acidic taste. Its pH must be acid. It's not a base. So there is, uh, the point is that the form can be sensed through taste. It can be sensed through the form of a flower, for example. Form of a flower, it's by smelling, and form of an edible object is by tasting it. Srila Prabhupada says this in his class. That's how he puts it across. So again, the bottom line is, it's almost like one after the other. From the subtle comes the gross. From the cause comes the effect, which then becomes a further cause of the next things that are coming about. So Devamrita Maharaj was saying in his class to this verse, he was saying, why do we have to understand all of these things? These are complicated. So he said it's like this tree, which provides the handle for the axe. And then you take that axe and you cut the tree down. So when we understand how this prison works, the prison of the body, the prison of the material world, how was that formed, then we can have an escape plan for ourselves. So even though it is all technical, the understanding is that it will help us come out of this. So I just wanted to, as a closing, I wanted to read what Kapila Dev himself says to Devahuti early on in the chapter. Um, so he says in text 2, basically, in chapter 26, text 2, he says, knowledge is the ultimate perfection of self-realization. I shall explain that knowledge unto you, by which the knots of attachment to the material world are cut. So the purpose of all of these things is for our attachment to be cut. And so we can, again, just to summarize what I just said in the last 10-15 minutes, is that the air, it moves, right? So it helps in the soul moving from one body to another. So from the air, movement of air, form is created. Then in text 39, we studied what are the characteristics of form. It has individuality, it has qualities, it has dimensions. And so now going forward in text, and later on in that same translation, it says, the form of fire is appreciated by the fire. So read the next verse. So basically from form comes fire, and that will be text number 40. So I think I'm going to pause here and see if you have any question, comments or corrections for me.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you. But I just wanted to add one small thing was, am I audible? My
Yes, I can.
Okay. So one thing was, just in addition to the point that you said of Kapila Dev saying that this knowledge helps in breaking the knots, it reminded me of the question that even Mother Devoti asked even before he started the whole narration was, her question was very specific. Tell me which process was also
Prabhu,
in addition.
you're breaking up, Prabhu. The audio is breaking up.
Um, Now?
I don't know, perhaps.
Okay. Uh, so what I was saying was, the point that you mentioned of Kapila Dev mentioning that this knowledge helps in cutting the knots of ignorance. So
Mm.
similarly, even the question that Mother Devoti asked at the beginning of this whole narration was, her question was, tell me which process of devotional service helps me attain your lotus feet. So in response to that question, he's kind of clarifying all of this. So I just felt like even the point of many a times we might think, why is this empirical analytical study helping in my devotional service? But the fact that Kapila Devi is responding back to that, it does help. But how does it help is the self analysis that we have to perform.
That we are not meant to be here.
Yeah.
That our body is made up of these gross elements. Our subtle body is made up of those, those things that are also temporary in nature. And so that's how I'm understanding. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna Mataji, this is Sachi Sutadas. Please accept my humble obeisances, all tourists to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Mataji. It's a very nice class. I appreciate how to perceive or how to communicate the intangible into tangible forms. Like in cognitive psychology, we learned about a process called mental models. So in a simple language, when we think, we have a finer models. Like if we, let's say for example, like if we are an architect to construct a Taj Mahal, we have the vision of it. But how to put that is a very complex process, because what you perceive cannot be communicated. Otherwise, it is put in some form of visual or a flow. We call it as a flow for algorithms. Like for others to perceive what exactly what's going on in our mind. So you touched on that aspect about how the senses, like by the touch in the table example, we can find whether it's a matte finish or a glossy finish by seeing it, and the texture. It's called texturization. So this is, I don't want to get into like a technical aspects, Mataji, but that's a very wonderful point on how what I'm thinking can be conveyed. Remember, like when we went to Home Depot to construct our home altar, we have to say them. So immediately we got a paper and we have to sketch and say, this is my mental model, this is what I want to accomplish. And the person on the other side was able to say, so for this you need this amount of a plywood, this sort of a things. So the communication is very helpful when the intangible is communicated into tangible form and perceived through the senses. That engineering is phenomenal. Krishna is really amazing person. I want to appreciate that.
This reminds me of what I've heard from Srila Prabhupada Swami, that about the Plato's ideas, where he says there is the realm of the absolute. So he says, like you said, just taking the same table example, before there is a table, there is an idea of the table. But where did that idea come from? It came from a realm of absolute where the table exists. And it is from that the thought comes. And so therefore, the gross comes from the subtle, which again comes from even more subtle. Just, yeah, I've heard that being spoken before.
Yes, Mother, that remains all copyrights reserved to Krishna. There's no copyrights that we can take it and put it, whether it is intellectual or physical. Thank you, Mother.
Thank you, Prabhu. And perhaps that ties to what Haridwani Prabhu was saying, when we see those things and see them, how they are connected to the absolute realm, that is slowly, that will help us cut the knot to the material world. Okay, I think we are on dot at 8 o'clock. So if there are no more comments, we'll end here. वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे। हरि हरि बोल।